The moment Josh Hawley opened his mouth, Jasmine Crockett ended the conversation. It happened in seconds. Seconds that felt like the entire Senate chamber froze in mid-breath. The room had been buzzing only moments before. Staffers shuffled papers, reporters typed furiously, cameras clicked in a steady rhythm. But as Jasmine Crockett finished outlining her argument, a point so sharp, so precise, it could have sliced through steel, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple, a pause. Then all eyes drifted to one person, Senator Josh Hawley. He leaned back in his chair slowly, like a man preparing for a performance. His shoulders settled against the leather, arms folding across his chest in a deliberate show of superiority. And then, inch by inch, he let a bitter, mocking sneer stretch across his face. Not the kind of smile someone gives when amused. No, this was the kind meant to belittle, the kind meant to undermine, the kind meant to send a message. I'm above you. Reporters noticed it immediately. A few of them glanced at one another, almost as if confirming they'd all seen the same thing. Staffers along the wall exchanged quick looks. Even the camera operators, who were trained to remain neutral, adjusted their framing, knowing something was about to unfold. Hawley cleared his throat, loudly. A manufactured sound designed to cut the energy of the room and reclaim the spotlight. "Congresswoman," he said, dragging out the title with a sugary condescension, as though he were addressing a high school student who wandered into a graduate seminar. "Are you sure you understand the constitutional implications of what you're claiming?" A few staffers behind him smirked, small, quick, nervous little smirks that lasted only a second but said everything. Hawley noticed. He seemed pleased with himself. He sat there like a man who believed he had just seized control of the entire hearing with one smug question. But Jasmine Crockett? She didn't flinch. She didn't frown. She didn't even sigh. She simply raised one eyebrow. Calm, controlled, almost amused. It was a tiny gesture, but it hit harder than any raised voice or fiery outburst. It said, "Are we really doing this? Because I've come prepared." Around the room, people instinctively leaned in, not because they wanted drama, but because they could feel something coming, something cold, something sharp, something devastating. Hawley pretended not to notice her composure, but his eyes darted for half a second, just long enough to reveal he did. He tapped his pen on the desk, trying to reinforce the illusion of confidence. Crockett slid one piece of paper aside, the soft scrape echoing louder than it should have. She positioned her microphone a fraction closer, and then she waited. Not because she needed time to think, not because she was intimidated, but because silence is a weapon too, and she knew exactly how to use it. The chamber felt suspended. Reporters hovered over their keyboard. Aides froze mid-note. The camera zoomed in. Then Crockett began responding, clear, measured, factual, not defensive, not emotional, just precise enough to show she knew exactly what she was talking about. One reply, two replies, three replies. And with each one, Hawley's smirk tightened. His fingers shifted. He flipped his notes faster, glancing down more often, searching for something, anything to counter her. 4 replies, 5 replies, each more devastating than the last, each one calmly dismantling his assumptions, his interruptions, his sneer. By the time she reached her 6th reply, something remarkable happened. The smirks disappeared. The paper stopped rustling. The cameras held perfectly still. And the entire chamber, the whole room that had been thick with arrogance and political theater, went silent. Not the polite silence of a hearing, not the routine silence of procedure. This was the heavy, stunned silence of people who had just witnessed someone deliver the kind of reply that rewrites the dynamic of a room. Hawley wasn't sneering anymore. He wasn't leaning back. He wasn't even blinking as much. Because Crockett's calm, controlled, razor-sharp sixth response had done something no one expected. It shut him down, completely. And the chamber knew it.
Hawley thought he had found the perfect setup, the perfect moment, the perfect angle, the perfect trap. He straightened his papers with an unnecessary flourish, cleared his throat in that practiced theatrical way, and began circling Jasmine Crockett's previous statements like a hawk. No pun intended, but the resemblance was impossible to ignore. His eyes were sharp, calculating, scanning for any opening he could twist into an advantage. He asked leading questions, not because he wanted answers, but because he wanted headlines. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if he were explaining basic civics to someone who'd never cracked open a book. He even rephrased her earlier remarks with a tone that said, "Let me tell you what you meant," dripping with arrogance. And then came the line. The one delivered with a dramatic wave of paper, a raised voice, and a look toward the cameras. "Let me help you understand," he said, stretching each word with polished condescension, "how executive overreach actually works." Behind him, a couple of his staffers exchanged that familiar expression, half smirk, half relief, like they believed he'd scored a point. One staffer leaned back as if settling in for victory. Another nodded with obedient enthusiasm, eager for the clip that would surely make its way across his political circles online. But Crockett? She didn't sit up defensively. She didn't shuffle her papers. She didn't lean toward the microphone. She simply blinked, slowly. A long, calm blink that said, "Is he serious?" It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. It wasn't for the cameras. It was the expression of someone who had seen this playbook before, too many times. But Hawley wasn't finished, not even close. He launched into a mini lecture, the kind designed for political theater rather than actual dialogue. It was part law school performance, part grandstanding, part self-boosting demonstration. Every gesture was calculated. Every pause was intentional. Every sentence was inflated with the confidence of someone who believed his own voice carried more weight than anyone else's factual argument. He spoke about statutes, precedents, constitutional layers, things Crockett already knew intimately, but he explained them like she was a tourist wandering into a courtroom for the first time. His hands moved dramatically through the air. He emphasized certain words far too loudly. He angled his body toward the cameras in a way that made his intentions obvious. This wasn't about policy. This wasn't about the Constitution. This was about optics. His supporters online would eat this up, he must have thought. They'd clip the part where he appeared to educate her and post it with captions like, "Hawley destroys Crockett," or "Crockett gets schooled." You could practically see him imagining it. But Crockett was not scrambling. She wasn't flipping through notes. She wasn't racing to prepare a counter-argument. She wasn't even annoyed. She was waiting, letting him talk, letting him circle, letting him dig deeper with every exaggerated gesture and smug syllable. Because Crockett understood something Hawley didn't. Patience is a weapon, a powerful one, a silent one, a tool far more effective than volume or theatrics. She waited with the stillness of someone who already knew how this exchange would end. Someone who had prepared not just for Hawley's arguments, but for Hawley's style. The ego, the theatrics, the predictable rhythm of someone who spent more time performing knowledge than actually applying it. She let him finish every over-explained legal principle. She let him complete every sentiment dripping with superiority. He let him bask in his own monologue. Because the longer he talked, the clearer it became to everyone in the room. Hawley wasn't building a case, he was building a rope. And without realizing it, he was tightening it around his own argument. Crockett sat there quietly, unbothered, unrattled, almost serene, listening, tracking, waiting for the exact moment to strike, not with volume, but with precision. Because patience isn't just a virtue. In a hearing like this, it's a weapon. And Jasmine Crockett was about to use it with devastating accuracy.
When he finally stopped talking, after minutes of circling, lecturing, and gesturing like a professor who loved the sound of his own voice, Jasmine Crockett finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned into her microphone. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't emotional. It was controlled. A calm, quiet signal that she was ready. Her first reply came out smooth and sharp, polite on the surface, but edged with the precision of a surgeon. She corrected one of his misstatements gently, almost kindly, adding a tiny rhetorical jab that went right over the heads of the overeager staffers, but cut directly where it mattered. Hawley smirked again, leaning back like he believed she'd fallen into his trap, like he thought she had just confirmed his assumption that she'd played defense. But then came her second reply. This one was firmer, clearer. She cited the exact statute he had misquoted, chapter, section, and legal interpretation, lifting the paper in front of her without once breaking eye contact. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't rush. She simply stated the facts with the confidence of someone who lived in the details of the law. Hawley smirked again. Then came her third reply. This one was firmer, clearer. She cited the exact statute he had misquoted, chapter, section, and legal interpretation, lifting the paper in front of her without once breaking eye contact. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't rush. She simply stated the facts with the confidence of someone who lived in the details of the law. Hawley smirked thin. Then came her third reply. She laid out the timeline he had conveniently skipped, a timeline he likely hoped no one would remember. But Crockett remembered. She reconstructed the sequence step by step, connecting events with clarity so clean that even reporters glanced up from their laptops. They could feel the tide shifting. A few seats behind Hawley, one of his aides stiffened. Still, Crockett wasn't finished. Her fourth reply was the one that made the room shift. She reached back to a previous hearing, one Hawley probably assumed no one would reference, and quoted him. His own words, verbatim, delivered with the calm precision of someone who had done her homework and wasn't afraid to use it. Hawley blinked. The first real crack. His smirk faded. He flipped through his notes quickly, searching for something, anything that could counter her accuracy. But Crockett wasn't done. Her fifth reply was the one that paused the room. Not because it was loud, not because it was theatrical, but because it was devastatingly measured. She dissected the core of his argument with the tone of someone who had studied not just the law, but the man sitting across from her. She addressed inconsistencies. She pointed out contradictions. She exposed selective interpretations he had leaned on for years. And she did it without raising her voice, without breaking composure, without once stepping outside professionalism. The effect was immediate. Hawley's eyebrows tightened. He flipped his notes again, more aggressively this time. His posture stiffened. His voice, when he attempted to interject, sharpened with irritation instead of confidence. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had expected Crockett to stumble, to defend herself, to look overwhelmed, to get emotional. He had expected her to fall into the narrative he had prepared for her. But instead, she was dismantling him. Not with insults, not with theatrics, not with volume, but with facts. Brick by brick, misquote by misquote, contradiction by contradiction, until the foundation of his argument wasn't just weakened, It was collapsing, and the chamber saw it. Reporters who had been typing earlier now watched with sharpened attention. Staffers who had nodded behind Hawley now stared straight ahead. Even the cameras angled subtly toward Crockett, catching the shift in momentum. The room wasn't watching Hawley anymore. All eyes were on her. They weren't waiting to see how she responded. They were waiting to see how she finished. And then came the sixth reply. The reply that didn't just answer him, the reply that didn't just defend her point, the reply that flipped the entire hearing on its head, the reply that took all of Hawley's bluster, all of his performance, all of his attempted condescension, and turned it into silence. A silence so complete, so heavy, so undeniable, that the chamber felt like the air had shifted. Because in that sixth reply, Jasmine Crockett didn't just respond. She shut him down.
Hawley, clearly irritated that every carefully staged trap he'd set had crumbled in his hands, shifted forward in his chair. Gone was the smug ease he had worn earlier. Now his posture was tight, his jaw rigid, his eyes sharper than before. He was no longer playing for the cameras. He was reacting. And frustrated. He planted his elbows on the desk, leaned toward the microphone, and fired off a line that made the entire chamber jerk to attention. Congresswoman, with all due respect, you're avoiding the core issue. Do you even understand the separation of powers as intended by the framers? It was not a question. It was a provocation. A collective gasp rippled across the room like a sudden gust of wind sweeping through stone pillars. Even the most seasoned staffers, people who had witnessed years of heated exchanges, lifted their heads at the sheer audacity of the remark. Crockett did not smile. She did not sigh. She did not blink away the disrespect. She simply paused. A stillness fell over her, the kind of calm that is unmistakably dangerous in a political arena, the kind of calm that means someone has chosen precision over anger, and that choice is about to cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. Slowly, she straightened her papers, not because she needed them, but because she wanted Hawley and the room to know she was fully in control. Then she lifted her chin, looked Hawley directly in the eye, and delivered a reply so surgical, so clean, so expertly crafted that even the stenographers, who had spent years typing through chaos, stopped for half a second. "Senator Hawley," she began, her voice steady as granite, "I understand the separation of powers well enough to know when someone is using it as a shield for political theater instead of constitutional clarity." The room froze. A kind of stillness took over, thick, heavy, electric. It felt like the chamber itself was holding its breath. But Crockett wasn't finished, not even close. She continued, calm, precise, unstoppable, the kind of delivery that doesn't just dominate an argument, but rewrites the power dynamic of an entire room. And if you'd like to talk about the framers' intent, we can do that. But please remember, intent is not a weapon to be used selectively. It requires consistency, something your voting record and your rhetoric have yet to demonstrate. The words hung in the air like a lightning strike suspended in slow motion. Hawley's jaw tightened, his fingers twitched, a vein near his temple pulsed. But Crockett had only begun sharpening the blade. She leaned a little closer to her microphone, her voice dropping into a tone that carried authority without ever raising its volume. "So yes, Senator, I understand it. What I don't understand," she continued, "is why you keep assuming that anyone who disagrees with you must be uneducated, uninformed, or unprepared." Boom! It wasn't just a statement, it was a detonation. A shock wave rolled through the chamber. People sat straighter, eyes widened, pens stopped moving.
Hawley leaned back in his chair, not intentionally, but instinctively, like someone who had just been hit with a force he hadn't anticipated. Reporters began typing so fast it sounded like rainfall. Crockett, still composed, still unshaken, delivered the final, devastating line. Respect is not optional in this room, no matter who you sneer at. Silence followed. Not the polite silence of a hearing, not the procedural silence of a pause. This was total silence, the kind that swallows a room whole, complete, undeniable, unforgettable. Hawley sat speechless, Crockett sat steady, and the chamber knew precisely what had just happened. A takedown, not with volume, but with mastery. A shutdown, not with anger, but with authority. A moment that would replay again and again, long after the chamber returned to noise.
Within minutes, literally minutes, the moment exploded online. Not hours, not overnight, minutes. The hearing had barely adjourned when the first clip surfaced on social media. A 10-second video of Josh Hawley leaning back with that trademark sneer plastered across his face. It spread like wildfire. Memes, captions, edits, people turned that single expression into 1,000 different interpretations. The Hawley sneer. Smug level maximum. When you think you ate, but she's about to serve dessert. But as viral as that moment was, it wasn't even the biggest part of the story. Because then came the second clip. The one the internet titled, Crockett's Sixth Reply. And that clip didn't just go viral, it detonated. Millions of views poured in within the first hour. Comment threads flooded with fire emojis, applause emojis, she read him comments, and variations of, I felt that in my soul. People across the political spectrum, yes, even some of Hawley's usual supporters, couldn't ignore what they just witnessed. Commentators praised her composure, calling it a masterclass in congressional discipline. Lawyers pointed out how she dismantled his arguments with precision, not emotion. Journalists replayed her final line in slow motion, breaking down the tone, the poise, the delivery. Some viewers admitted they'd watched the clip dozens of times, pausing to admire the moment her words landed like a gavel on marble. But the reactions weren't just from the public. Even political opponents, people who rarely, if ever, praise Crockett, found themselves saying, quietly, anonymously, off camera, yeah, she handled that perfectly. Because she had. Not by shouting, not by arguing, not by matching Hawley's theatrics. She handled it with the kind of intelligence, restraint, and controlled confidence that hits harder than any raised voice ever could. Meanwhile, Hawley didn't say much afterward. He slipped out of the chamber quickly, gave a short, evasive comment to the press, avoided social media for the rest of the day. He didn't need to say anything. The internet was already speaking for him, with montages, reactions, breakdowns, and countless captions like, Crockett, 1, Hawley, 0. This is how you shut down arrogance. Calm versus loud. This is what real leadership looks like. People weren't remembering the sneer. They weren't remembering his interruptions. They weren't remembering his exaggerated hand gestures or condescending tone. Those moments became footnotes. The world remembered something else entirely. They remembered the moment Jasmine Crockett, in real time, on camera, without ever losing her cool, that calm intelligence can defeat arrogance every single time. It wasn't a takedown filled with shouting. It wasn't a heated argument. It wasn't a viral moment built on drama alone. It was a takedown built on clarity, a shutdown built on composure, a masterclass in grace under pressure. People shared the clip not because it was explosive, but because it was powerful. Not because it was chaotic, but because it was controlled. Not because she humiliated him, but because she didn't have to. She simply let the truth and her discipline speak for her. By the next morning, the clip dominated every social feed. By afternoon, analysts on major networks were dissecting it frame by frame. By the end of the week, it had been turned into podcasts, essays, think pieces, reaction videos, commentary breakdowns, and highlight reels. Every headline carried the same message. Crockett shows the power of staying calm. Intellect over intimidation. The shutdown heard across the chamber. And that is precisely why the moment didn't just go viral. It became a lesson, a reminder, a blueprint, a demonstration of what happens when a prepared mind meets an unprepared ego and wins with dignity. That's why the clip dominated every feed for days, not because it was loud, because it was unforgettable.
And if you want more moments where truth cuts through arrogance, don't forget to like and subscribe.